Have you ever heard of a standoff so bizarre that it almost sparked a nuclear conflict? Picture a single tree standing in one of the world's most heavily guarded areas, with both sides ready to unleash catastrophic force at the slightest misstep. It sounds like the setup for an over-the-top thriller, but this incident actually happened, and the aftermath remains an enduring reminder of how fragile peace can be. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary story of how a single poplar tree along the Korean demilitarized zone brought the world terrifyingly close to an all-out confrontation. This isn't just another Cold War anecdote. It's an unsettling piece of history that involves massive firepower, secretive orders, and tensions so high that even the soldiers on the ground seem stunned. Over just a few days in August of 1976, an obscure corner of the world's most militarized border turned into the setting for a global drama. The bizarre series of events that followed would forever change how North and South Korea handle their shared boundary. By the end of these paragraphs, you'll learn how that single poplar tree got in the way of a clear line of sight and nearly triggered a chaos nobody wanted. When World War II ended, Japan's colonial grip on Korea was broken, leaving Allied powers to decide the fate of this newly freed land. In a rush, world leaders drew a dividing line at the 38th parallel, handing the northern half to Soviet influence and the southern half to American oversight. This division was expected to be a quick, temporary measure long before chainsaws and soldiers entered the picture. The Korean peninsula was grappling with the aftermath of two world-shattering conflicts, a placeholder until Korea could be unified again. But as the Cold War ramped up, hopes of reconciliation evaporated. Tensions solidified when Kim Il-sung rose to power in the north, establishing a communist regime. Trained in Moscow and backed by the Soviets, Kim Il-sung claimed all of Korea should be under his rule. By 1950, the peninsula erupted into the Korean War, drawing in the United States, China, and other United Nations forces. After 3 violent years and millions of lives lost, an armistice declared a halt to the fighting. It wasn't a peace treaty. It was more like a long, tense pause. Neither side fully trusted the other, and the dividing line became the infamous Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. The DMZ was ironically named. There's nothing demilitarized about it. Both North and South poured troops and artillery into areas around that line, wary of a sudden attack. Within this tense buffer zone lay the Joint Security Area, JSA, arguably one of the strangest places on Earth. Here, soldiers from North and South Korea, along with representatives of the United Nations Command, stare each other down day and night. It's a spot where the wrong glance or random gesture can inflame national pride. And it's where, for reasons that defy common sense, a single poplar tree grew into a massive liability. It's also the site of the so-called Bridge of No Return, named because crossing it from the southern side places you directly in North Korea with no easy path back. Over the years, prisoners of war and individuals seeking repatriation have taken that route, never to return. The sense of finality there is palpable. The JSA itself has just a handful of buildings, observation posts, and guard stations. Yet for such a compact space, it's the stage for an astonishing display of caution and might, especially when either side perceives a threat. Within a few meters of that grimly named bridge used to stand a towering poplar tree. This tree seemed innocent enough, just another piece of flora in a land better known for fences and barbed wire. But it soon became a subject of paranoia for the UN command, essentially US and South Korean forces. Why? Because it obstructed the line of sight from a key observation post, making it possible that North Korean soldiers could move unseen, launching a sudden attack. In a place where every inch of ground is a potential flashpoint, the idea of even a slight vulnerability was unacceptable. By the summer of 1976, US and South Korean officials decided enough was enough. They had already tried to keep the poplar trimmed so it wouldn't block the view across the DMZ. But by August of that year, the tree had grown large enough to be considered a significant security risk. The plan was straightforward: send a team to prune the branches, restore visibility, and move on. In theory, it should have been quick and uneventful. A small group was chosen for the job: 2 US Army officers and several other personnel, including both Americans and South Koreans. They carried pruning tools, not firearms, hoping to keep this operation looking like normal maintenance rather than a provocation. As they set to work, there was little reason to suspect trouble. Granted, tensions were always high, but so far, occasional trimming hadn't started a war. This time, however, a North Korean detail arrived, led by an officer nicknamed Bulldog by the US and South Korean forces. He was known for his aggressive posture, and he immediately began ordering the pruning crew to stop. According to North Korean propaganda, the poplar was of personal significance to Kim Il-sung, and harming it was tantamount to disrespecting their leader. The US officers, one named Captain Arthur Boniface, were in no mood to negotiate. They believed they had every right to trim that tree, given that it stood on the southern side of the JSA. Captain Boniface turned his back on Bulldog's demands. That's when everything escalated. Reinforcements from the North Korean side arrived, armed with clubs and crowbars. The Americans and South Koreans, by contrast, had only their pruning tools. The moment Bulldog removed his watch, handed it off, and uttered the command, violence erupted. What followed was a horrifying brawl. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, the UN personnel were quickly overpowered. Captain Boniface was seized and beaten in a brutal assault. Another officer, Lieutenant Mark Barrett, tried to take cover, but was cornered and attacked with an axe. Both men lost their lives in a matter of minutes, and several others were injured. In the aftermath, as UN forces rushed to rescue the wounded, the North Koreans insisted they had been the victims. Their state media claimed American forces had initiated a so-called axe attack, turning the truth upside down. Back in Washington, the reaction was immediate. Word got out that 2 US servicemen had been killed in a savage confrontation at the DMZ. Suddenly, what began as a simple tree trimming mission had the potential to spark something far more dangerous. A direct clash between nuclear-armed adversaries. When word of the axe murder incident reached top US officials, it triggered shock and fury. The entire American military apparatus roared into action, placing forces on a heightened state of readiness known as DEFCON 3. In the mid-1970s, the Cold War was still in full swing. The Soviet Union was backing North Korea, and China had already shown willingness to intervene in the Korean Peninsula just a couple of decades earlier. Any miscalculation could spiral into an unimaginable conflict. In the White House, President Gerald Ford and his advisors huddled in an underground bunker to discuss possible retaliation. Suggestions ranged from a carefully targeted strike on key North Korean positions to more extreme measures, like demonstrating nuclear might. A chilling echo of the atomic bombings at the end of World War II. However, each proposal came with tremendous risk. A direct attack could provoke North Korea into launching a full invasion of the South, which might draw in the Soviet Union or China, and nobody was eager to roll those dice. Eventually, after intense debate, a strategy emerged. The US and its South Korean allies wouldn't let the murder of their servicemen go unanswered, but they also wanted to avoid igniting World War III. Thus was born Operation Paul Bunyan, named after the legendary North American lumberjack known for his giant stature and his ability to fell forests in a single swing. The symbolism couldn't be more direct. The operation would remove the offending poplar tree from the DMZ once and for all, and demonstrate overwhelming force to discourage North Korea from any further aggression. Behind closed doors, generals and CIA planners pieced together an audacious show of strength, the likes of which had rarely been seen since the massive troop movements of earlier conflicts. Thousands of troops, countless aircraft, and even nuclear-capable systems were prepared for deployment, all for the sake of a single tree. It sounds absurd, but in the charged atmosphere of the Cold War, making a statement mattered. The point wasn't just to remove the poplar, it was to send North Korea a message. Never do that again. On August 21st, 1976, the plan went into action. Early that morning, a fleet of military trucks rolled into the JSA, carrying a group of engineers armed with chainsaws. Not just a few trucks, dozens of them, each filled with personnel ready to protect the team assigned to cut the tree. Had someone been observing from across the border, they would have seen a surreal procession of men calmly stepping out with buzzing saws while others stood guard with rifles, grenade launchers, and more. Yet that was just the ground portion. Overhead, transport helicopters circled, loaded with additional troops. Attack helicopters bristling with rockets hovered nearby, Prepare to unleash devastation if the North tried anything. Higher up in the sky, B-52 bombers roared in from Guam, potentially carrying nuclear payloads. They were escorted by fighter jets, both American F-4 Phantoms and South Korean F-5s. The message was clear: if you interfere, you will face the full might of two Allied militaries. Naval power. Off the coast, the USS Midway, a formidable aircraft carrier, stood ready, carrying even more jets and missiles. Along the DMZ, artillery units took positions, some rumored to be nuclear capable. In total, about 12,000 additional US soldiers were moved into South Korea for the operation, bringing the combined force to staggering levels. The entire spectacle was orchestrated with surgical precision. The North Koreans, watching from their side of the JSSA, must have been paralyzed by the scale of this deployment. Every second they faced a choice: retaliate for the felling of their cherished Poplar, or stand down and let the Americans finish their job. But the cost of intervention was laid out for them in no uncertain terms. With the memory of the earlier incident still fresh, it wouldn't have been surprising if the North considered some show of force, yet even they seemed to grasp the catastrophic consequences that any aggressive move would bring. For 42 minutes, the engineers' chainsaws buzzed. They cut down the towering poplar, branch by branch, trunk by trunk, methodically erasing any chance it could be used to hide movement. South Korean Special Forces, some armed with Claymore mines strapped to their chests, stood at the ready, daring any North Korean soldier to take a single step across the line. But the North stayed put. The poplar fell without a single bullet fired. Operation Paul Bunyan ended as abruptly as it began. Once the last branch was removed, the helicopters and aircraft peeled away. The trucks carrying ground troops departed, and the DMZ returned to its uneasy quiet. A tree stump remained, soon fitted with a plaque commemorating the 2 US officers who lost their lives in the so-called Axe murder incident. In a strange twist, the crisis concluded without direct conflict on the day of the operation, even though the stage had been set for a massive confrontation. The wider reaction to this show of force was telling. North Korea, often quick to issue fiery rhetoric, did something highly unusual. They offered a statement that bordered on regret. It wasn't a straightforward apology, but it was enough of a gesture that tensions momentarily dipped. Meanwhile, South Korea and the United States felt they had restored the balance of power at the JSA. The authorities also decided to alter the layout of the joint security area so that personnel from the North and South could no longer mingle freely. Before that, soldiers sometimes walked across each other's sides, which in hindsight was an open invitation for dangerous face-offs. Over time, the story of how a poplar tree nearly set off a global catastrophe gained a near-mythical quality. Many still shake their heads in disbelief at the magnitude of Operation Paul Bunyan, which mobilized warships and nuclear bombers over a single act of pruning. Yet the incident underscores a sobering reality about the DMZ. Any misunderstanding or minor aggression here carries stakes that are exponentially higher than in most other places on Earth. At its core, the Axe murder incident and Operation Paul Bunyan highlight how razor-thin the boundary is between peace and war, even over something as unremarkable as a tree. When two nations are locked in a decades-long standoff, seemingly trivial events can balloon into crises. Pride, fear, and the urgency to demonstrate resolve can create a perfect storm, driving leaders to consider options they otherwise never would. To this day, the Korean demilitarized zone remains one of the hottest flashpoints on the planet. Despite talks of reunification and occasional diplomatic breakthroughs, the structural issues remain unresolved. Nuclear weapons are a reality in North Korea, and the South has powerful allies who won't stand idle if a major conflict breaks out. The slightest provocation can escalate quickly, as it did in 1976. Except next time, there might not be a chance to de-escalate before real missiles start flying. One might wonder how many other potential flashpoints around the world teeter on a similar edge. The tale of the poplar tree isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a parable about geopolitics. It warns that, in high-stakes regions, even small misunderstandings can lead to irrevocable damage. It also demonstrates how critical it is for cooler heads to prevail, even when faced with the most brazen acts of aggression. In the end, the saga of the Korean DMZ's most notorious tree leaves us contemplating the delicate balance that keeps conflicts at bay. If thousands of troops and the threat of nuclear force were needed to safely trim one obstruction, it speaks volumes about the gravity of tension hanging over the peninsula. Perhaps the next time leaders around the world face a standoff, be it over territory, trade, or a seeming technicality, they'll recall how a single poplar nearly brought us to the brink of disaster and think twice before raising the stakes. So the next time you see a routine task, remember that, in the most volatile corners of our world, nothing is truly routine. A single tree might be enough to rekindle old animosities. And, as history shows, it can take unprecedented firepower just to keep simple actions from igniting a bigger blaze. In a place as tense as the Korean DMZ, every twig or branch is laced with the potential for disaster. It's a sobering thought, yet one that reminds us how crucial it is to strive for dialogue before desperation and caution before conflict.